We are down to the final four. And in this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, me and my co-host Leif Thulin, we will break down what we thought from the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight. And then we'll talk about the final four. So stay tuned. All right, big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. And this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That is prizepicks.com. Promo code Locked On. I'm your host, Rafael Barlowe, the director of scouting for NBA Big Board and the founder of NBA Draft Junkies. And my co-host for today is Leif Thulin, the guy that watches more college basketball than anyone else. And I know you had a great weekend of watching college basketball. So first of all, what was the game that stood out to you the most in this wild weekend of college basketball?
Well, I'd say my favorite was Michigan State and Kansas State. I think that was an all-time classic type of game. From a scouting perspective, I'm not sure that one stood out as much. It was just from the basketball lover in me. That was awesome. Guard-dominated game. 20 points, 19 assists from Markquis Nowell. A little mighty might action. That was awesome. From a scouting perspective, though, I would say UConn, the demolition they've put down both on Gonzaga as well as in a few other games. I mean, they've
Arkansas.
been dominant. Yeah, they beat Arkansas badly too. And Anthony Black played well in that one too. So I guess you could say from a scouting perspective that he was a bright spot. But Jordan Hawkins is someone that I looked this up because I was curious. I remember he played against Walker Kessler and Jabari Smith in a tournament last year. And I was like, man, who's this skinny freshman? He can shoot the lights out. Had a horrible mistake at the end of the game where he tried to jump stop in the front court, lost the ball, and they almost cost UConn the game. And I tweeted, I said, I don't think he's ready yet, but I'm excited to see number 24 on UConn. And that was in November of last year. So Jordan Hawkins is someone that I've personally rooted for since that moment. And I felt like he lost his confidence a lot last year. And he regrouped this year, and his confidence is through the moon, as it should be. And he's really accelerating his stock as a movement shooter. And I've said this and I've gotten some flack for this, and I guess we can kind of start with a hot take somewhat. I value his type of shooting more than that of Grady Dick because he shoots off movement. And it's like a guy like Kyle Korver or Duncan Robinson, JJ Redick, all these guys who had similar skill sets were even better shooters because they were able to shoot off like they were coming off on hairpin turns with full speed and drain it. Whereas a guy like Grady Dick, I kind of feel like he's a set shooter, and he's a better player because a more complete player because he's bigger. But that's my kind of bold take I put on Twitter, and it's gotten a little bit of flack from followers.
Man, Twitter is just, you're going to get flack no matter what you put out there, unless you're just playing it safe all the time. But speaking of shooting on the move, and it's a little bit off subject. So there was an NBA player that I used to work with, and me and my brother were training him. And I was young as far as like being a skills trainer or whatever. And I had him shooting. We were just trying to think of different ways to challenge him, right? Because when you work with NBA players, I mean, they're so good at what they do. I mean, they are the top 400 in the world. So it's sometimes it can be difficult to challenge one, especially when he's really skilled. So, I would watch different players and what they did. And so I would try to have him come down like on pin downs, or at least like under the net. And then he would sprint out. And one day he was like, no, I can't do this. He said, there's only about 5 guys in the world that can do what you're trying to get me to do. He was like Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Reggie Miller, Kyle Korver, Ray Allen. Maybe he named another one. And what I didn't understand how difficult it was for someone to full sprint, like let's say they're under the basket, full sprint to the corner, set their feet, catch, fire with accuracy. And then if you are left-handed, it's difficult if you're doing it on one side of the rim because you got to twist your body. And he just mentioned to me, like, that is a special skill set for guys that can do that. And then I heard another comment, and I want to say it was from Chris Paul, and he said him and JJ Redick.
Oh, I know this story. This is a good one.
In a standstill, he said he can match him. They can go shot for shot in standstills. But if it's coming off action, setting their feet, catching, shooting, he was like, he can't come close to JJ in that. So I said all that to say this: what Jordan Hawkins does as far as shooting on the move is special, and you're right on with your assessment of that's probably more valuable than Grady Dick, even though Grady Dick can shoot on the move, but it's not at that level of it's like full speed catch, shoot,
he's
release,
more of a
fire.
flare screen. He's a flare screen shooter as opposed to a curl guy.
Yeah.
And this I'm kind of partial to this, and this may show a little bit of bias. In high school, I came flying off those type of screens, and so I tried to hone my craft as best I could. Get the 1-2 foot right or left side and curl off. So I find that stuff really fascinating. I just dug up a text I sent to one of my good friends who's pretty into this scouting. I said I prefer Jet and Hawkins' movement shooting over Grady's, but Grady's size is better than Hawkins, so that's why he's ahead. But then there's Terquavion Smith and Marcus Sasser who can shoot but are smaller, so it's less valued. And so this is just a random excerpt I put in my notes because I was trying to draft this up to tweet at some point, but my friend and I were arguing about this. And I was talking about how shot creators like Keontae George, Nick Smith, Terquavion, Marcus Sasser are great shooters off the bounce, which I think is really more impressive still than catch and shoot. But the guys that I think are the best shooters are the guys who can shoot off movement. And I said Jet and Hawkins, but Hawkins is a better movement shooter than Jet, and he comes off way faster too.
Yeah, I mean, it is like his release is quick. I mean, he's gonna be tough to defend, and I think he really helped himself in this tournament as far as his NBA draft stock. I mean, he had a good year as is, but I think a couple spots he may have moved up. But let's talk about this past weekend from a scouting perspective. Top guys did not have good weekends. Maybe Anthony Black. I mean, as far as like the freshman class, Brandon Miller had an absolutely horrible NCAA tournament. Jarace Walker, I think, was 4 for 16 in his game. How much stock do you put into NCAA tournament? Because to the natural eye, sometimes it is hard to unsee what the last impression was.
This might be an unpopular take, but I watch a lot of college basketball, so I feel like the tournament favors veterans,
Definitely. We saw
so
it this weekend.
I feel like guys that perform really well as freshmen are rare, so it stands out in a positive. But I don't buy into Brandon Miller shot the worst. I think this is a true stat of someone who shot 35 shots in an NCAA tournament. Full tournament campaign, he had the worst percentage of anyone ever who shot 35 attempts. That doesn't matter to me, to be honest. I think that they didn't play well as a team. He started forcing, he's dealing with a nagging groin injury, and I wish he'd played better, but it doesn't really impact his actual evaluation for me. I was actually impressed by both he and Jarace Walker, by their ability to impact the game and by being somewhat of a decoy. Like Brandon Miller was shooting terribly, trying to score, but he was passing impressively. He was defending, he was rebounding. Jarace Walker was a distributor that I was very impressed with. Granted, Miami's defense is not great, but he was passing really well, hit a few shots, rebounding, defending, switching. I think too many people get caught up in the counting stats, like namely points and shot attempts, and don't analyze what they do to impact the game. And so I'm not really one to really hate on a tournament, though I will say mannerisms in a tournament are important to me. And that's why I was disappointed in Keontae George last weekend when I was there in person sitting in the third row. And I see him kind of frowning and kind of pouting. And then defensively, I think he tried hard some possessions, didn't try hard others. And I mean, I'd rather you be a bad defender trying your hardest rather than someone who has talent defensively and not try. And so that was something that bugged me.
Yeah, I mean, there were quite a few things that really like caught my attention as far as like Brandon Miller, Jarace Walker, and guys that did not look the best, but they showed different skill sets and they were still contributing without their shots falling. I'll get into that when we return. Let's talk about Prize Picks. And Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. All you do, you pick 2 to 6 players, and if they will score more or less than their prize picks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people. It is just you versus the projections available. And Prize Picks offers projections on any sport: NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, NHL, WNBA, men's college basketball, women's college basketball, cricket, disco golf, MMA, boxing. I mean, so many. And the entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It is that easy. There are safe and fast withdrawals, and it is currently operational in 30 states and Canada. So all you have to do is download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com, sign up and play daily fantasy sports. If you're a first-time user, you can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. So do not forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for instant deposit match up to $100. All right, second segment is Rafael Barlowe with Leif Thulin. We're just recapping the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight. And we left off talking about Brandon Miller and Jarace Walker. We all know that Miller can score, even though he really struggled putting the ball in the basket in the tournament. He had a 0-point game. I thought he showed, some flashes of what he was doing all season in the second game. And then the third game is just pretty bad. I'll be honest, I fell asleep on it. But what I did see was he rebounded and he made some, I thought, impressive reads with his offhand. And I have faith in him as a shooter. I think the shooting is going to translate. I think the scoring is going to translate. But now I'm starting to think that he is someone that eventually, by year 2 or 3, will be someone that you'll see playing a little bit of point forward in stretches. I don't know how often our listeners follow the NBA, but Brandon Ingram has been playing with the ball in his hands a lot more lately. And I saw over his last 2 games, he had like 23 assists and only 1 turnover. And I think eventually we may be able to see Brandon Miller playing a role in the NBA where he has the ball in his hands a lot more than we saw at Alabama. You're starting to see him in ball screens and playing pick and roll. And then Walker is someone that I'm not shocked by his passing that you mentioned, because I watched a lot of his high school film. But if I didn't watch his high school film, I'd only have seen like little flashes here and there of his passing. So what is your overall take on those 2 guys, what they showed as playmakers?
I think, well, firstly, I've kind of been a proponent of point forwards for a while. Like one of our very first podcasts we did together, we talked about who are the best point guards from last year's class, and I named plenty of players that were kind of jumbo point guards or even barely point guards by categorizing them. So I was not shocked by either of their passing, because like you, I've watched their high school tape. I didn't watch a ton of Jarace, but I've watched 2 or 3 games, and it sticks out. Like you can point to different times where it helps that he was with good players, and you can point that he knows he has the trust and he has just a feel and timing. As for Brandon Miller, I didn't know about the left hand, the dexterity, the ambidexterity of passing. That was impressive, but I always kind of thought he had a good pace of play, like both in terms of like knowing how to use change of pace, and once he gets down there, he knows how to kind of stop and pass. I sometimes he would go up and he was just bigger, better, and stronger than some of the guys he played. So I wasn't stunned. The one thing I'll say is when Alabama ran through him, even though he was scoring badly, he's such a presence that they played better, and they started, forcing shots. They shot terribly from 3 as a team. Not only did he play poorly, but I think the takeaway was, yes, I was surprised by the ambidexterity, not by the passing awareness. And so that was a trait in a positive direction, more so than I was concerned by the lack of scoring in the tournament by him. As for Jarace Walker, 4 of 16 against Miami stands out to a lot of people. What studs out to me was 11 rebounds, 5 assists, and 0 turnovers. You watch that game and you see missed shots and 2 of 6 from 3. I would say that 35% from 3, which is what he was better than I expected him to shoot on a Houston team that kind of was crash the glass, be physical, be grit and grindy. So I was impressed with his shooting overall. So that's not a concern from a 1-game sample size against a hot team like Miami, who plays really fast and makes Houston uncomfortable. So yeah, I guess I'm not surprised. I'm kind of like you in that, but overall, I think the flashes they showed of their secondary and tertiary traits and skills impressed me more than I'm concerned by their lack of scoring and shooting percentages over the tournament.
Speaking of playmaking, we cannot talk about the NCAA tournament without mentioning Markquis Nowell. He put on a playmaking clinic. I found myself rooting for Kansas State. I actually had them going to the Final Four before he put on this show, but just give me your thoughts on his performance and if you think he has a chance to play in the next level in the NBA, that is.
I mean, he was fun to watch. Like, I'd seen a lot of Kansas State and not always full games, but you watched the Big 12. It was the best conference in the country. So
even though the Big East, I think Danny Hurley said the Big East.
Yeah, I saw that.
Is the best conference.
It's funny. I'm a bit of a hypocrite either way in this one because preseason, I did a conference podcast when we were kind of rotating. When I think may have been when you were out of town. I ranked which conference were the best for basketball and which one were for the best prospects. And I said the Big East was the best ahead of the season, but I pretty sure that the Kansas State and the Big 12 were the best in season, despite the results of the Big East having some nice tournament results. That said, I watched a lot of Markquis Nowell, but he never quite like you could see he had the control of the game, but everyone knows their offense in the Big 12. Conference play is really convoluted and difficult to orchestrate your stuff. Not in the tournament. They don't have enough time to scout you. They don't know your sets. Man, was he fun to watch. They play fast. He's got some flair to him. Everyone's kind of says the New York City street point guards. But he also is a 90% shooter and can drain threes. Like, he shot 35% from three from difficult threes. So shooting and playmaking, check out. He's 5'8". The question for me is he a good defender? Steals would indicate yes, but my eyes would indicate no. I feel like he gambles a little bit too often, and you've got to be a Jose Alvarado level pest at that height to be a playable defender. So, I mean, guys like him have come around, like Tremont Waters, for instance, from LSU, is a guy who's similar, not quite the flair as a passer, but I'm hesitant, but I'm rooting for him. He's a wizard with the ball.
Yeah, well, I think the difference between Waters is, I mean, even when I watch Wembanyama, Waters can't make certain passes.
Yeah.
And my knock is like, man, you got a guy that's 7'5", and you very rarely see Victor used as a lob threat. Wow. Nowell, I mean, I think he's just a much better passer. Number one, he's fun to watch. But two, like you said, he really stood out when he was going against non-Big 12 teams because, like you said, they know your offense. And even Danny Hurley made a comment about it with UConn. He was like, it was just good to play against teams that aren't in the Big East. But I was rooting for Kansas State. I mean, I think Jerome Tang is like an awesome individual. I had a chance to meet him
for sure.
Yeah, I had a chance to meet him just briefly when he was at Baylor. I had some friends that went there, and I went to a couple practices. But just a great human being, and some of the guys on the staff that I have some relationships with. But Markquis was definitely the most fun to watch. I mean, was it 19 assists?
Yeah, 20 points, 19 assists against Michigan State.
And then Saturday, I forgot what he finished with. It was like 30. Was it like 30 and 11 assists?
30 and 14, I think.
14 assists.
30 and 12. 30 and 12. And then against Montana State, he had 17 points, 14 assists.
I mean, the passes that he was making, whether it was like late passes, no look passes, he is a gambler, and I think you're going to get that with anybody that plays with a lot of flash and flair. He is going to try to squeeze some passes into tight spaces. And we all saw the fake argue with the coach with the lob. I mean, that pass was from so far out, and it was so on the money. I'm rooting for him. I think that he's going to be in a difficult situation in a sense as far as like NBA, because I think during the pre-draft process, and I mentioned it before, guys are going to run from him. If I'm an agent, there's no way I'm sending my 18 or there's nobody 18 other than Gigi Jackson, but there's no way I'm sending my 19-year-old client to match up and get, especially someone that is considered like a first round pick or that's going to be drafted. I'm not going to put him in a workout with Nowell. As far as defense, I think that he has a chance to be a solid defender, or more so like a pest, because he'll have a much reduced role if he were to make it to the NBA, which will allow him to have more energy to pick up full court. I mean, there were times where, at least in the Kentucky game, I saw he was picking up full court, not necessarily like full court pressuring, but he was still picking up and just trying to get Kentucky out of their offense. So I think that he can be a little bit more effective as a defender in a much, much reduced role, because, I mean, I see him as a guy at, best case scenario, he's the third point guard, maybe second best case scenario, but I would love to see him get a chance. And I think it's going to be interesting because, like I said, I can imagine agents ducking him in the pre-draft process. Then I can also imagine him going to Summer League and probably being on somebody's Summer League team as a backup to the player that they've drafted, that the team is invested in, and the team just runs and looks a whole lot better with Markquis running the offense. All right, when we return, we'll wrap up this last segment. We'll talk about the Final Four and our thoughts about this Final Four from a prospect perspective. But Built March Madness bracket is here, and we know you have a favorite bar or puff, and now's your time to make it count. Go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. I'll be voting for birthday cake. What is your favorite, Leif?
I like the mint brownie. For the puffs, I haven't had a ton of them. Birthday cake's probably my favorite puff.
Yep. So I guess we'll both have birthday cake in our bracket. And to win, you'll be voting for that bar too, or whatever bar you want to vote for. So support your team and support your bar or puff. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you will be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky locked on listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will get a 12-month subscription to Built and have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You got to try Built. Built is the best protein bar ever. They're amazing, and they're good for you. What makes them so good is that they're all high in protein, low in sugar, and covered with 100% real chocolate. So run to Built marchmadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so we still have a few days left. So hop in and support your pick. All right, last segment. Final Four is complete. We have Florida Atlantic, which big surprise. We have UConn, Miami, and getting one.
San Diego State.
San Diego State. Yeah. How could I forget? I was rooting for Creighton. I'm an Omaha guy. What a crazy ending to that game. I mean, there were so many crazy endings to games. I felt like it was either a blowout or it came down to the very last possession in a lot of the games that I saw. But from a scouting perspective, as far as NBA prospects, and let's talk about NBA prospects in 2023. Jordan Hawkins is the first one that comes to mind. It's going to be a first-round pick. Do you think there's anybody else playing in this Final Four that is a lock to get drafted this year?
I don't know about lock, but I think Andre Jackson gets drafted from UConn. He's another guy that I'm biased because I love bigger athletic guards. He can't shoot, but man, does he do everything else exceptionally well.
Yeah. Probably
the best athlete, pure athlete in the country this year. And Richard Stayman, if he listens to this, will vouch for this. I've been talking about Andre Jackson as my favorite, like, random player in college basketball since 2020 when he burst on the scene, just because the guy hits his head on the backboard going for blocks that no one has a chance to get. And then he runs up the floor and throws like beautiful lob passes, and he plays with reckless abandon. As for NBA skills, he'll be a tremendous defender. He is a guy who's capable of being a kind of secondary, tertiary guard that can facilitate your offense. He's unselfish, and I'd rather have athleticism and not be able to shoot, because I think you can develop shooting more so than you can develop his level of athleticism. So I think someone's going to take a gamble on him and say, let's hope you can be Herb Jones-esque, because that's a similar role that Herb played at Alabama. Herb was better, but he's younger than Herb was. They both play the point forward, both tremendous defenders, and Andre's a better athlete. He's just not quite as well-rounded.
You think he's gonna have to totally reconstruct that shot?
Yeah, probably. I mean, so did Herb. Herb shot 7% as a junior at Alabama.
But I'm talking about like the just form, because he has a funky looking.
Yeah, he's got a low release that kind of pushes up and then accelerates rapidly.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I think he's the most likely candidate to get picked this year. And the second most likely, for me at least, and this is a bit controversial because a lot of people like his own teammate more, I think Jordan Miller is the best prospect on Miami. He obviously, it's easier to say today when he has 27 points, 7 field goals, 7 for 7 on the field goal, 13 from 13 from the line. But all season long, I've felt he's the best player on Miami. He rebounds, he defends. He guarded Jabari Smith Jr. last year, and he locked him down. He's athletic. He's got a good package around the rim. He's also a guy that I think needs to reconstruct his shot a little bit, but by the percentage, he's shot 35% from three. So I'd say he's the third best prospect.
I actually had someone. I'll go ahead.
I was going to say who could get drafted.
Yeah, I had a scout reach out to me, someone that mostly does like NBA personnel scouting. So they're just now really starting to get into the college scouting. And he reached out to me and he asked me about Jordan Miller. And he was just saying, why is he not a first round pick? And I mentioned that, well, he's 23. So I think that's going to work against him. And he was just like, wow, he didn't know that, again, because he covers the NBA as far as like the scouting. So it's not uncommon for guys to like start really digging deep into the college guys late in the process. But he was, based off of what he saw this tournament, he was wondering why wasn't he seeing Jordan Miller on different draft boards and being talked about a whole lot more. I mean, he had a good year, but he was like a guy that really started getting on radars very late. And do you believe that at 23 he will get drafted, or do you see him more so as a guy that's going to sign a two-way deal like 10 seconds after the draft is over?
I think that depends on what him and his agent prioritize. Because if I were drafting and I had a 55th pick, I'd take Jordan Miller. Does he say, you know what, I'd rather choose where I go? Probably. But he's a guy that I think can make an NBA roster. Defensively, I love his versatility. Rebounds tenaciously. 35%. I know his shot's not beautiful. But if you can make the ball go in the hoop, and he shows really good touch, he shoots the free throw really well, 13 for 13 in the Elite Eight game, and shoots 54% from the field as a 6'6" guard. Sign me up there. I mean, here's a comparison. Tyrese Martin from UConn last year. Yep. I think Jordan Miller is the similar prospect. Martin went 51st in the draft last year. And
which was a surprise to me.
Yeah, and I think Miller is gaining more traction by a better tournament run. And I think he is not quite the athlete Martin is, but he's a more well-rounded player.
All right, a couple more questions for you. Speaking of older prospects, Naquan Tomlin, I had someone reach out to me, and their question was, does it make sense for him to go back? Because they wonder if he'll look as good without Markquis, like setting him up and just kind of giving him easy baskets. What do you think about Tomlin?
That's a good question, because there's two trains of thoughts. Is if he would be the featured guy as opposed to Markquis, and then how would he look? I would say he probably rides a strong tournament showing and tries to get drafted, because he's also an older prospect. Overall, I think he's still raw, but you expect that considering he didn't play high school basketball. He started playing like street ball, picked up for JUCO, and here he is in the Elite Eight. I'm a fan of him. I'd take a flyer on him late in the draft, and you know, I don't know if he comes out, and I kind of hope they stick together. The FAU team, I think Jonell Davis is a is a guy who could ride this momentum, the wave of fame for FAU, because that was a team that very few people, myself included, I watch a lot of college basketball and I'd barely seen them.
Yeah.
And they're just obscure. They're not on main airwaves. But he's got an impressive game, good touch, can shoot the ball, and he's a good athlete. So he's a guy that I wonder if he rides the momentum.
All right, I'm gonna make all right, before I get into that, Sir Jabari Rice. We have a follower on YouTube who's always, hey Rafael, when are you gonna put him in your mock? And I'm like, he's not going to be in my mock. And I am going to hold it against him that he's older. He was in the high school class of 2017. Like, that was the same class as like Colin Sexton, Michael Porter Jr., Trae Young, but he has played well. What do you think about Sir Jabari Rice?
I'm with you. I think it's hard to bank on a guy who breaks out this late, and he was good at previous stops at New Mexico State, but it's hard to break out. And I mean, he's not like he's an All-American. Like, he's good, but I feel like to make this rise at 24 years old, you got to be an All-American caliber player to get drafted, and even then, it's a stretch. So I'm with you. I probably won't put him in my top 60, but I enjoy watching him. He's got a beautiful pump fake, nice jump shot, and he's integral to a team that's had a really good season.
Yeah, it's like the teams that seems like they went far in this tournament were all older, which, I mean, it sucks for high
Except
school
for
kids.
FAU.
Except for FAU. So that was my next point. FAU is young. I mean, what is it? 2 sophomores? Their 2 best players are sophomores.
I think they have 3 sophomores, 1 freshman, and then a senior that start.
If I'm not mistaken, one of them is like a a third-year sophomore.
I think that's true.
And I'm just totally speculating here, right? I think they'll test the waters, and I think some school is going to throw their coach a huge bag. There's a couple schools, I'm not going to mention them, but they haven't filled their vacancy yet. So I'm like, okay, they're waiting. What's his name? Dusty May. Dusty May. I believe they're waiting on him. They're going to give him some money that he can't refuse, and he'll bring those 2 guys with him. I know the NCAA made some crazy transfer rules, last minute transfer rules, but that's just what I'm guessing is going to happen. But they should definitely test the waters. Now, you mentioned Davis, but what do you think of Elijah Martin's NBA potential? A little undersized at 6'2", but he looks like he's 6'5" out there.
Yeah, he can really jump. Like, he compensates by having explosive leaping and long arms.
And he shot the ball well from 3. I want to say 36%.
I don't love his shot, though. I know percentages similar to Jordan Miller. Actually, he's kind of got a bit of a shot put.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a little reserved. I think Davis is the better prospect and the better player. To address what you said about throwing a little bit of money around, I wouldn't be surprised if some very big schools see this and they say, wow, you know what? Here's a lot of money. Would you be interested in playing for us? But I hope and pray this FAU team stays together, because I think they can make multiple runs. And so
I think so too.
But Dusty May is going to get some enormous amount of money that you can't refuse. And I can't judge him for doing it, but the traditionalist college basketball fanboy in me, which is what I am, would hopes and prays that they're like kind of Wichita State was for 4 or 5 years when they were in their heyday with Ron Baker, Fred VanVleet. This is kind of the same ilk.
Austin Reeves.
They're a 9 seed, and they make it to the Final Four, and they got young players that have NBA potential, and then they make a couple runs. So that's the hope for me.
I want to get your thoughts on one of my favorite players. I've been talking about him for a while, Donovan Clingan. Do you think he's put himself in position to be drafted this year? I think he should absolutely test the waters. And I want to say it may have been our last episode or one I did later on in the week. I think he's in a similar situation as Kessler Walker. Or is it no?
Walker
Kessler. Man, every time I feel like I got it right, I get it wrong.
You made this point to me early in the season, so credit to you here. You said that he could be Walker Kessler in like November, maybe December. The difference for me is that if he comes back, I think he's a lock to go top 20 because assuming Sanogo leaves, because they'll run the same offense and he's going to put up 18 and 10. And then he's going to block shots and the world's going to see he's more athletic than he appears, which is the same thing that Walker Kessler did when he went to Auburn.
I think he showed the play where he ran the floor. Was it against Gonzaga?
Gonzaga.
Yeah, man. I think his situation could be similar. I think Sanogo comes back.
You think Sanogo comes back? Okay, that changes the equation a little bit.
Well, I mean, do you think he'll get drafted if he comes out?
No, but I think this is the best chance for him to get drafted because they're the odds-on favorites to win the national championship. It's like when Omari Spellman came out in 2018. Should he have? Probably not. Was he the 30th or 31st pick? Yes. People get infatuated with these guys that win.
And I know year, it didn't work for the Carolina guys last year.
Yeah, and it shouldn't have, and it shouldn't have with Spellman either. But I think he rides momentum, and at the worst, he's a dominant player in Europe, and that's not a bad thing.
No.
So I would. Obviously, it depends on that. If Sanogo comes back, I might declare if I'm clinging. If not, I'd put up 22 and 10 and go in the top 20 and be pretty pleased with my decision to come back. Bet on himself.
Yeah, I know UConn fans aren't going to like this, but if Sanogo comes back, then I think he has to do the Walker. Did I say it right that time?
Yeah, you got it.
The Walker Kessler route and go to a school where he's going to play and start and get about 30 minutes per game. If he does that, then you're talking 18, 10, and 3 blocks per game.
But he's a Connecticut boy. Like
he definitely is. Yeah.
And you know where I'd go if he does transfer? Without a second doubt, I'd go to Purdue.
You think Edey's leaving?
Yeah.
I don't even know if he's a lock to get drafted. I think Edey could end up being like.
I don't think he is, but Edey's not going to have his stock improve.
But he may get huge NIL money. I mean, I think you're going to see more guys do the Drew Timme route. Like, hey,
that's a fair point.
I'm going to stay and I'm going to collect all this NIL money. I know my stock isn't going to jump tremendously, so I can make more money staying. And we've had this NIL discussion plenty of times. Well, that wraps up this episode. I know you did a mock draft a few days ago, so we'll have to have you come back on later on this week to do your mock draft. I'm putting up the finishing touches on mine. I think a lot of people are going to be shocked at some of the choices I made. So thank you, the listener, for making the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. Now, for your second listen, you got to check out Game to Game, and the Game to Game on the Locked On NBA channel covers games from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, it's Rafael Barlowe, Leif Thulin, and we are out.